spending in California when she does, cash out all those chips. I guess, Friedberg, let's go to you to talk about the new variant. Maybe you could tell us how to pronounce it, because there seems to be some debate about the pronunciation of this. And what's your take on it?
Were you in a frat in college? You have to memorize the Greek alphabet.
I went to school at night, so I didn't have the college experience. Yeah, went to night school.
I think it's Omicron, but that's
Omicron. Got it. Okay. Omicron.
And it's
try it again, Jake. Last time. Go
it's not a transformer.
Omicron.
No, there's no N. Omicron.
Let's monetize the Greek alphabet.
Megatron? It's not a transformer, J-Cal.
Omicron.
I missed you, Sacks. Wait, how many miles away from you? Let's go get a Cuban sandwich after this.
Yeah, come over here.
Why aren't you guys together right now? I don't get it. I thought you guys would be in the same room.
Let's go to the Cuban deli and play, I don't know, Cuban sandwich chicken.
Yes. Who could eat less bites as we lose our weight? I have the place. I got the sandwich place over in Little Havana. That's unbelievable. But anyway, continue. Tell us if it's the end of the world or don't worry.
No, it's at this point, there's three things that scientists are looking out for data on. One is kind of the innate transmissibility of this variant. The second is, which is like, the R naught in an unvaccinated population. The second is immune evasion, meaning it can get around antibodies or get around people that are vaccinated or have had the virus. And then third is kind of the severity, right? Which is like how many people translate into hospitalized cases. Okay. So every day there's, varying data and information coming out. There's an incredible spike in South African surveillance data and testing data. Right now, as of today, I think 25% of people getting tested in South Africa are testing positive.
Okay. Wow. That's stunning.
And yeah, and only about a quarter of the population is vaccinated there. So this will be pretty telling pretty quickly on if hospitalizations start to climb and if the disease severity in an unvaccinated population kind of matches or mimics what we've seen with other variants. This variant is quite different. So there's like 30 mutations on the spike protein here. Normally, you'll see an evolution where one mutation leads to another variant, and they call it a new variant when there's enough kind of differential behavior of the virus. So there's always mutations happening, but once a mutation causes a change in behavior, they note it. So normally you see kind of an evolutionary track where there's like one mutation, then another, and so on. In this case, this mutation set is so far away from anything else that exists. There's like 30 new mutations that popped up on this protein, on the sequence that sequences for this protein, that it's like such a different virus.
This is a major upgrade. Yeah. When did they?
It's so different. It's almost like
it's like a new virus altogether. Yeah.
It's almost like it's not a naturally occurring virus that behaves like other viruses do.
Okay, so cutting the conspiracy.
When did China upgrade the virus?
Let me cut the conspiracy theory for a second and just say what the kind of current consensus thinking is of what may have caused this incredible change. One is that someone or some people that have a severe immune compromised systems had a virus in them that did not kill them, but just kept circulating in their bodies for months and months and months, and mutated so much that it got to the point, and this is what's really interesting, it got to the point that it mutated such that it can now transmit amongst a vaccinated population. So think about the virus finally found a way out of the floodgates, and the floodgates are blocked in by vaccinated people. And so that's kind of one reasonable explanation. The other one is that South Africa is just a monitoring station, right? There's a whole big chunk of Africa where we have no surveillance going on. There's no genetic sequencing going on. And there could have been anywhere in Southern Africa or even in Central Africa that these viruses could have been circulating amongst populations for the last year and a half with no surveillance or testing or sequencing. And all of a sudden, one person travels to South Africa and boom, this thing pops up on the radar and everyone's like, oh, wow, look at what we just stumbled into. So look, one thing that seems pretty certain, this variant is going to be everywhere fast. Like it is so transmissible by some estimates. And you can read Trevor Bedford or there's a bunch of great folks on Twitter. You can kind of follow their writings on this, but Trevor's done a great job. The R naught on this could be as high as 40, which is, measles by comparison is 12 to 13. Now it's more likely that the R naught is somewhere between 7 and 20, but regardless, it seems to be that high in the presence of an immunized population, meaning it's got incredibly good evasiveness around people that have the vaccine or have had the virus. So it's going to spread like crazy.
I think this whole thing is a complete fucking nothing burger.
Yeah. And so that's the other side. It's like maybe it's just not a big deal and it ends up being like Delta and it sort of spreads around. A lot of people don't know they have it. And then all of a sudden we all wake up.
It's even more impotent than Delta.
So that is definitely something that people are saying because there's not a lot of new hospitalizations spiking in South Africa. We're not seeing severe cases of all these people. 25% of people are testing positive. They're showing mild to no symptoms, and that's anecdotal right now. So we'll know in the next 2 weeks of whether this actually changes hospitalization.
To me, this is more of an example of, yet again, how unreliable our institutions are than anything else. We knew nothing about this. We had a couple of cases, and the mainstream media, literally in a moment where there was, frankly, not a lot of news.
Slowest news day of the year is the day after Thanksgiving for people. This is when it broke, Friday after Thanksgiving.
Exactly. Essentially manufactured this histrionic reaction to something where we didn't know anything about it. We didn't know how important it was. We didn't know how bad it was. We didn't know anything. And then what happened was then the financial media took that and then ran with it, basically trying to whip up even more histrionics, but within the financial markets, which then feed the mainstream news cycle. And we had this whole loop going down the toilet bowl. And lo and behold, I think what we're actually learning is what we should have just waited a few days to realize beforehand, which is it's not that severe, but to the extent that it is, we've sequenced it, we have vaccines, and we can deploy these quickly. Oh, by the way, at the same time, the New England Journal of Medicine put out this study, which basically showed how important and efficacious these vaccines are. So the fact that we're even talking about this to me is just absolutely emotional and not practical or useful.
The big question, Chamath, is it's not about whether it is functionally a nothing burger or not, but what's really important now is how policymakers are going to respond to this, right? Because there is a press cycle, there is a bit of a hysteria. Everyone's asking me about it. Everyone's freaked out about it. Everyone's worrying about it. And so the policymakers are going to respond to that sentiment. And the question is, are we about to face more lockdowns and things that are going to be adverse to the economy? And, how are markets going to react? Not necessarily to the true severity and the risk of this variant, but more importantly, to the policy decisions that are going to come out of the perceived risk of this variant. And that seems pretty scary right now.
Well, you saw Biden. I mean, one thing I'll give him is this. I mean, I think he's done a bad job on a lot of other things, but on this, his political instincts were sound, which is he said very clearly, we're not going to go back to lockdowns. And I think he was really speaking to Democratic governors when he said that, to people like Gavin Newsom and our poker friend, J.B. Pritzker and Whitmer in Michigan. Listen, guys, we're not going back to lockdowns no matter what happens with this Omicron thing. We're not going to do school closures. We've seen how unpopular the school closures were in this off-year election. It was one of the big issues that helped Glenn Youngkin win Virginia, which had previously voted for Biden by 10. So I think you saw the message come down from on high. We're not going to go back to lockdowns. Now, I think, though, that what that does is admit, and I think what Omicron will show, is that lockdowns didn't work at all. At most, lockdowns and all these measures, whether it's mask mandates or whatever, all it did was delay the timing of the virus. What you're going to see is Omicron will be everywhere very soon. There's nothing that policymakers can do to stop it. The only thing that seems to work is vaccines and booster shots. There's some good data around the third booster preventing serious cases. Other than vaccines, and I guess the one thing policymakers could do would be to get red tape out of the way so that they can more quickly come up with a booster to this new variant. That would be the one thing they could really help with. But otherwise, nothing policymakers have done has helped. Well, and I think this is going to be an admission that ultimately lockdowns were a disaster for the economy.
Nobody could argue lockdowns are not a disaster for the economy. But in the early days, if we go back to when this pandemic started, we really didn't know how to handle this. We did not have any treatments, and we were ventilating people and essentially killing them by blowing oxygen into their lungs too, aggressively, from what I understand. So in a way, wasn't it? Okay. Well, I mean, I think it's a debate because we're not ventilating people now as much as we were, right? We're flipping them over, et cetera. But the lockdowns did, correct me if I'm wrong, Friedberg, at least allow us to not have the hospitals overrun like they were in New York and Italy. And that was...
I don't know if that's true. I honestly don't know if the hospital... I don't know if the lockdowns actually changed the... We don't know. Huh. Look, I'm going to sound like and now we're going to, kind of enter into this controversial territory, but...
Sure, let's do it.
it seems like a lot of people still got together in private settings, and the virus continued to spread. And so there's a question around how effective lockdowns were and how much they really did change the trajectory of the spread of the virus. And yes, they probably did have a muting effect, but it's unclear what the trade-off was and whether it was really worthwhile. And at the end of the day, a few days and a few weeks after they started, people were over them, and they started meeting on their own.
We didn't know how deadly it was, though. At that time, we didn't know how deadly it was.
Admittedly, we didn't know a lot at the beginning of the pandemic, and so you have to, I think, give people a break for the mistakes that were made, say, in March or April. I think by May, it was pretty clear the lockdowns weren't going to work. If they had worked, states like California wouldn't have had 10 pages of exceptions based on how politically connected you were. So, for example, the local bartender had her bar run out of business by lockdowns, but Hollywood studios would get a break on their productions. But so we know that lockdowns didn't work. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been these exceptions. And we have data from Sweden. Remember all the hysteria about Sweden basically was doing nothing. They weren't doing lockdowns. They weren't doing mandates.
They were going for herd immunity.
They were going for herd immunity, and they were killing their people. Well, guess what? Sweden's data was no worse than anybody else's. The hospitals weren't overrun. And I think what Omicron will finally show is that, our whole policy since the beginning of COVID, whether it was 2 weeks to stop the spread or these like vaccine mandates or even this idea of herd immunity, it's all been to try and put the genie back in the bottle. In other words, it's been to try and defeat COVID. It's to put this virus back in the lab, I guess you could say. And the reality is we're never going to defeat it. I mean, it really is something that we're going to have to learn to live with and to manage. And so, vaccines.
And there will be a variant it'll be a seasonal disease, and it'll be something like the flu in terms of how it cycles each year. And it seems unlikely that it's going to be eradicated through vaccination.
Let me pull Chamath back in.
There may be a variant that matters, but this is not it. And
in all likelihood,
instead, what we really need to do is have a process of not overreacting, because there's going to be n number of these into the future. And the only thing that really decays the vaccine's potency, the COVID's potency, is having it go through vaccinated people. And thank God we had so many people vaccinated, because this is what so again, this whole thing is a nothing burger. Let's just move on.